Welcome back to my YouTube channel, History with Me. This is part 15th of the series Corporate Taxes, Direct and Indirect Tax. And in this lecture, हम बात करने जा रहे हैं Levy and Collection of GST की. So before starting the lecture, if you're new to the channel, subscribe and hit the bell icon to get the daily updates and notification. Also, if you haven't joined my Telegram group yet, you can join it because कहीं ना कहीं lectures जो हैं हम series के end में आने वाले हो. I think after this lecture we have just 4 or 5 lectures remaining. और उसके बाद notes कहीं ना कहीं full notes इस पूरी series का upload कर दिए जाएंगे Telegram group के. So for that it's really very important कि आप Telegram group को join करें. So without any delay, let's move directly into the slide and understand levy and collection of GST. So we know GST is a single tax system in India. एंड इट्स रियली वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट कि हमें पता हो कि किस तरीके से जीएसटी को चार्ज किया जाता है, किस तरीके से कलेक्ट किया जाता है जीएसटी को. वी हैव टॉक्ड अबाउट वेरियस things about GST. We have talked about GST की slabs होती है. We have talked about its structure which consists of CGST, IGST and SGST. We have talked about a group of people who are elected for a specific purpose, making important decisions related to the goods and services tax in India, which is GST Council. We have talked about a web page portal which is specifically made for the state government or the central government and the taxpayers, so that their efforts are synchronized in a way कि सारी चीजें ट्रांसपेरेंट मैनर में हो, एफिशिएंट मैनर में हो. तो देयर इज अ वेब पेज पोर्टल फॉर इट, जहाँ पर टैक्स पेयर्स अपने टैक्स फाइल रिटर्न्स कहीं ना कहीं फाइल करें और टैक्स को पे कर सकें और वेरियस चीजें कर सकें रिलेटेड टू जीएसटी. सो वी हैव टॉक्ड अबाउट जीएसटी नेटवर्क एज वेल. नाउ विल टॉक अबाउट, we'll have that overview about किस तरीके से जीएसटी चार्ज होता है और किस तरीके से जीएसटी कलेक्ट किया जाता है. And these are very significant aspects of the Indian tax system because we are aware that GST is a single tax system in India. So GST is on the supply of goods and services. माफ कीजिएगा, यहाँ पर आप करेक्ट कर सकते हो, GST is levied on. आपको ये चीज याद रखनी है. वी हैव टॉक्ड अबाउट दिस थिंग इन द प्रीवियस लेक्चर्स दैट जीएसटी जो है, पहले क्या होता था, टैक्स ऑन टैक्स वाला सिस्टम था. ओल्डर टैक्स सिस्टम जो था, अभी डिफरेंट टैक्सेस होते थे. एक्साइज ड्यूटी लगा दी, वैट लगा दिया, कस्टम ड्यूटी लगा दी, डिफरेंट टैक्सेस लगा दिए. अब क्या है कि भाई ये सारे टैक्स हटा दिए, सिर्फ एक टैक्स है जो कि है गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज टैक्स, जो कि गुड्स और सर्विसेज पे लगेगा. और उसमें हमने ये कहा कि जब जब हम प्रोडक्ट पे वैल्यू ऐड करेंगे, तब ही हम कहीं ना कहीं इस जीएसटी को ऐड करेंगे, इस टैक्स को ऐड करेंगे. ओनली व्हेन वी आर एडिंग वैल्यू टू द प्रोडक्ट. somehow if we are improving the product, we are adding this improvement to the product, that means we are adding value to the product, and then only we are going to add a tax to the product or service, and that's your GST, that's your goods and services, goods and service taxes. So goods and services tax is always levied on the supply of goods and services. So you have to note this point कि सिर्फ goods की supply पर लगता है. So GST is levied on the supply of goods and services, and the system ensures that businesses collect a tax from customers. और ये सिस्टम कहीं ना कहीं ये इंश्योर करता है कि जो बिजनेसेस हैं, डिफरेंट बिजनेसेस हैं, आप रेस्टोरेंट में जाते हो, आप बिल पे करते हो, आप वहां पे जीएसटी पे करते हो, एंड देन दैट जीएसटी pass on further to the government by the retailer or by the restaurant owner. But ultimately, who is paying the tax? You, as a consumer, paying the GST or the tax. So GST is on the supply of goods and services, and this system ensures कि द जो भी businesses हैं, जो भी organizations हैं, जो भी companies हैं, they collect tax from the customers and then they can pass it on or they can pay it to the government, while also allowing for this input tax credit so that they can avoid this tax cascading. So through this mechanism, जहां पर वो इस तरीके से जीएसटी को कलेक्ट कर रहे हैं, it really becomes a simple taxation process. और ये बहुत सारी कॉम्प्लेक्सिटीज को जो पहले आती थी उनको ये कम कर देता है. And it also ensures that the tax is applied uniformly across the country, and that's why we have different slabs made, and you have to charge GST as per those slabs only. So that's what, a little bit about collection of GST and or how the GST is levied. Let's try to understand this in more detail. So, charging GST, levy का मतलब कहीं ना कहीं GST charge करना. So, the charge of GST or the levy of GST, it refers to when and how GST is charged on goods and services. We all know if we are charging this GST on the supply of goods. So the retailer, the shopkeeper, or maybe the organization, the company, the businessman will take the GST from you. The consumer will pay, and then the business owner will pass it on to the government. So it consists of a dual GST structure. So we have already studied about it that it consists of CGST, the Central Goods and Services Tax, then IGST, SGST, and we have various GST rates as well. So we have talked about 0% where it is exempted for those goods where it is exempted. Then we have 5%, we have 18%, we have 28%, the max. So we have various GST rates as well, depending upon the types of goods and services. The GST Council has different tax rates for various categories of goods and services, and that's how we charge GST. Also note that the main taxable event under GST, again, it is the supply of goods or services. So unlike the previous or older tax regime or system, GST is not levied on manufacturing or selling, but it is levied or it is charged on supply. It's a very, very important aspect on levy of GST. Great. Now let's talk about a little about collection of GST. Now, collection of GST, collecting GST, it's very much linked to the process of filing returns and making payments. So returns file kar rahe ho, payments de rahe ho. That's what is collection of GST. So it's about the registered taxpayers, who are required to file this monthly or maybe quarterly GST returns that showcases their sales purchase, their tax liabilities, and there's been a lot of data in that particular online portal because more than a crore of people are doing this or filing their returns or showcasing their different data, you know so there's a lot of data that the government has to deal in that online portal, and that again is managed by GST network. In the previous lecture we have talked about it. So if you look at small businesses, specifically for small businesses to chote businesses, with a turnover of less than a specified limit, they can opt for the composition scheme. So composition scheme में क्या होता है? They pay tax at a lower rate, but they cannot avail of the input tax credit. So that's what happened in the composition scheme, basically with the businesses who have, which have that turnover of less than a specified limit. So वो low rate पे कहीं ना कहीं tax pay करते हैं, but they cannot avail ITC, that is input tax credit. So that's it about this lecture where we've talked about the levy and collection of GST. In the next lecture, we are going to talk about valuation of GST, the 16th lecture. Then we'll talk about GST valuation rules, registration of GST, and we'll end the series with few more lectures after that. So keep studying. Take care.